So let's go ahead and get started. So thank you again for joining us today for our Learning and Growing webinar on critical reading strategies. Our presenter today is Christina Marty of the University of Wisconsin. My name is Samantha, and I'm a member of our training and support team here at Hawks Learning. Now we'll have a live Q&A session after the presentation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A as we go, and we'll address them at the end. And with that being said, I'm actually going to go ahead and hand it over to Christina.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Hawks Learning. I wanted to talk, okay, there we go. I wanted to talk a little bit about critical reading, and I want to give a little bit of caveat here. I've been teaching freshman composition at the university level for over 20 years, and I've been the Writing Center director for 10, but I don't have any real formal background in literacy or reading. And I'm saying that because I think that this is something that anyone can incorporate into a freshman writing class or a class on any discipline across college or university campus without having a whole lot of background necessarily. Everything that I've done for this, I've researched on my own through various scholarly articles on literacy and reading in higher education. And I'm happy that I get to share it with you today. So what I'm going to share with you is a practice exercise, and it is an exercise in critical reading strategies. Basically, what I tell basically where this originated is, as Writing Center director, I teach freshman composition and I direct our campus Writing Center. And students would come in and they would have problems with their papers. And what I would often find is that the problem stemmed from reading comprehension, and the students were having a hard time reading the different college level texts that were being assigned. And in addition to that, also just kind of through informal discussion and chat with colleagues in the hallways, I would often come across colleagues who would sort of vent to me a little bit as my role as the Writing Center director that students weren't reading the assignments they were giving. So I kind of have information, at this point coming in from all different directions, and, professors across the curriculum kind of complaining, why aren't the students reading? Myself seeing students come in with writing assignments, which really stemmed from difficulty in reading. And my final little anecdote is one time I was giving a workshop in the Writing Center on critical reading, and I had a student come in and she was just very exacerbated. And the situation was that she was going to drop a class. And I asked her, why are you going to drop this class? And she said, because there's so much reading. We have chapters to read. We have PowerPoint presentations to read. We have all kinds of things that we have to read outside scholarly articles. And I said, well, how are you reading it? And she said, I'm just sitting down, turning the page and going from one word to the next and plowing my way through, and I don't have time and I can't retain it, and I'm going to drop the class. So that's when I started to realize that I think there are some things that can be done to help students more effectively read and understand and retain what they're reading. Those are always my two goals. So I'm going to start with the first visual, and let me make sure that you can see this. Do I still have you there, Samantha?
Yep, we're still here. We can't quite see your screen yet, though.
Okay, I'm working on right now, sharing the screen. Here we go. So what I'm hoping that you can see right now is a screen that says critical reading strategies. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, so this is basically a visual that I made based on just some research that I did, reading different articles and my own experience. To be honest, I don't believe that for you participants out there that there's probably anything new here. I also say that to the students. I really don't think that there's anything new in what this visual is. But my goal with this was to come up with a collection of different strategies in a visually somewhat pleasing way. I'm not a graphic designer, but I wanted to make it somewhat visually pleasing, not just a list of strategies. And this is what I've come up with. I have adapted it and edited it a lot over the years that I've done this. And what I usually do is I provide this with the students and I pair it with an article. I'm going to give you an example of an article that I use. This is, I've used different scholarly articles over the different times and ways and situations in which I've done this. This is just one. This I call the Choi article. And what I do is I ask the students to read this, and I don't give any other direction. I know that they're going to likely experience some difficulty with the article because it's very difficult, and they may give up, they may get frustrated, they may, you know, read the first sentence and not read anymore. But I don't preface it with anything. I just ask them to read it. And then when they come in class, when they come to class, I also give them my critical reading strategies. And I tell them straight out, look, I don't think that there's anything new here. I think that what my goal is for us to take this time that has been allotted and for us to just practice going through this difficult article with these strategies. And I do that because I'm a little bit worried that there's going to be pushback. We know how to read. We don't need this. We learned this in second grade. I'm not going to do this. This is a waste of time. So I tell them, look, I know there's probably nothing new. Why don't we take this opportunity to just apply some of these things you likely have already been confronted with and apply them to a difficult scholarly article. So we just go through from there. And I sort of have different things that I work with. This is the primary thing, the critical reading strategies visual. And then the students also have the article out. When I first started doing this, I would just go through the different strategies and we would talk about them. So for example, adjust your mindset. What are the things that you think about before you read? And we talk a little bit too about how does your reading differ based on what you know you want to get out of it. And, you know, again, a lot of times these questions, when I ask them, they're kind of, you know, even the students will be thinking, well, these are kind of no-brainer questions. Of course, we, you know, have different goals in mind depending on how we want to read and what we want to get out of it. But the thing is, okay, you know this, but do you often take time to practice it? And I'm big on sports metaphors. So, you know, if you were to ask someone, what does Michael Jordan do what did he do to become great at throwing free throws? Well, obviously he just threw a bunch of free throws, right? But the thing is, if you want to become, there's a difference between knowing what you have to do and actually then doing it. And so this is an opportunity for the students with my guidance to walk through these strategies and actually apply it. So for example, when you're reading, you know, I say to the students, when you're reading an article like this Choi article, what is your goal? And that brings up the discussion depending on the class, the students, and what, you know, they're thinking in their mind. They might say, well, I don't know, the teacher assigned it. Okay, true, but what do you think the instructor, the professor had in mind for you? And then it really gets them to think through that. Are you going to be tested on this information, such as, you know, a matching or a true false or a fill in the blank? Are you going to use this as a way to springboard a discussion in class? Are you going to use this to write an informative paper? Are you going to use this to write a persuasive paper? And by asking these different questions, it gets the students to really think about what it is that they're doing and with this and how they need to adjust their mindset accordingly. So that would kind of be the first one. And then we kind of go through the rest of these strategies accordingly. We talk about annotation. Do you like to write on your article or do you like to take side notes? And I tell them, it doesn't really matter, to be honest, how you do it. You should develop your own preference. When you were younger, you would, perhaps your teachers would tell you, I want you to highlight this. I want you to underline this. I want you to circle this. One time I had a student who had dyslexia tell me that writing on a text is extremely makes it extremely difficult to read it then. So I tell students, regardless of how you take notes, develop your own preference. This is where the self-efficacy piece comes in. Develop your preference, what works for you, and then do it. The next one, we talk about text mapping, which is related to annotation. So that would be the text map. And I use the example of, with their cell phone zooming in and out. How is it that it helps you to see the larger picture? How do you map it? Do you like to write an outline? And then oftentimes I go through like a text chunking exercise where we take this difficult article and we just write, we don't do the whole thing typically, but maybe we'll take a section and we'll just write the main point in each paragraph for 5 or 6 paragraphs. And then they see a couple of things. They see that this helps you to see the larger picture. This also helps you to remember. So if you were to come back to this article and be responsible for the information in it, you would be able to sort of get into the article faster because you have the overall main idea of each paragraph chunked. And was there a number 3? I can't remember. Maybe those were the 2. But I think the third thing I was going to say is this also sort of crosses over with annotation, because essentially we are taking notes on the text, but it helps us to see the larger picture. And I tell the students, me personally, if I can't see the larger picture of a text, I'm not going to remember it. And a lot of times it's important that I remember it because I'm the instructor teaching the text. So I'll tell them that and I'll say, what works for you? And then I might call on 2 or 3 students and ask them what works for them. Is it outlining on a separate paper? Is it chunking the text like I do? Is it highlighting the main points of each paragraph in a certain color? And they're able to then ideally be empowered by claiming this is what works for me. And then they can kind of claim that strategy as this is how I excel. Next, we go to the reading log, which again, these 3 middle ones sort of overlap. Reading log is where they might summarize or paraphrase a paragraph in order to make sure they understand the meaning. And it's very similar to annotation, although I see reading log as a meaning thing. The students understanding what is in the text. This is also a good opportunity then to talk just briefly about, do you need to look up every single word? Because sometimes looking up every single word, actually just can become distracting. And then you're not actually in the text, you're not making progress. The other thing too is this reading log is how using an article as a source for a paper comes into play with the paraphrasing. So that would be reading log. I'm going to move over to the gray box, evaluate. This is where we evaluate the text and, how do you know this is going to be a quality text? And we sort of go through that. If the professor chose the text for the students, then we can say, well, if we trust our professor, then our job has been done for us, really. We don't have to evaluate it. But if we're choosing the text on our own, then we do have to decide whether this is something that's going to be a quality, credible text for us to read. Going over to rhetorical function, which is probably the biggest, because this is probably the one that really helps the students dig into that text and understand how they should see it. So we talk about the purpose. If we go back to that Choi article, what is the purpose of this article? And sometimes students don't completely understand that a scholarly article is often written by university professors because they do have requirements on them to publish, and perhaps, in fact, many times it's based on research, and it's usually for the purpose of informing. Sometimes students don't always understand that. They're not sure if it's for informing or persuading. So then we talk about, whereas this particular type of writing would be, the scholarly journal is going to probably be for informing. And then we talk about a newspaper op-ed, an editorial. Now those types of things are clearly for persuading. Going back to the critical reading strategies, and the next thing on the list would be genre or form. So this is a scholarly peer-reviewed article that we're tackling. How is this different from from an article, say on WebMD? Or how is this different from an article maybe on National Geographic or something like usatoday.com? How are these different? So we talk about the different genres, finally, or not finally, but we also talk about audience. Who is this written for? This is where it gets really interesting, because we talk about who is the intended audience. And sometimes students, they raise their eyebrows a little bit and they say, well, is this written for college students? And I'll say, actually, in most cases, it's not. In most cases, it's written for other experts in the field. And then I'll say, how do you feel about that? And, does that impact you and your expectations on yourself when reading it? Usually I have to talk a little bit more about that and tell them, don't beat yourself up if you don't understand this. It may not have been written for you. It may have been written for an audience that has more knowledge on this topic than any of us in this room. And in that case, give yourself a little bit of a break. You might not understand it all. There's a good chance you won't understand it all. And I try to say that in a way that isn't, I don't want them to think that I'm talking down to them in any way. We're simply not experts in the field, and you can give yourself a little bit of a break for not understanding it all, and that's okay. And I think just by saying that helps them a lot to, take a sigh of relief. Oh, you mean I'm not expected to understand all of this? But at the same time, then I want to make sure they don't go too far with that and then say, well, then the heck with it, I don't have to read it. So I'll tell them it's okay if you don't understand it all, because you're really not the intended audience. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't read it. You do still need to read it. You just need to know you might not understand it all. Well, what does that mean? That means that we really need to try our best to understand the overall main idea and the main points that the author's getting at. And we can do that by going back to that text map, by chunking the text. I think that really empowers them to understand that it's okay if you don't understand it all, but you still have to tackle it, because that's what college is. College is tackling things that you may find very difficult. The last one is contextualization. This is always a tricky one for them, and probably because it's tricky for me to explain. But basically, we talk about how the context in which this is being written can also impact the way in which we're the way in which we're receiving the message and reading it. And it can also impact the writing itself. So for example, an article written in 1950 about climate change is going to be much different than an article written in 2022 about climate change. And there's all kinds of topics like that are very much different depending on the context in which it was written. It could have also been written in a one country versus another country. So we talk about that. And next we talk about interacting with text. This is just a way in which this allows the students to talk about, yeah, I learned about this in sociology class, or I learned about this in the other class. It also allows them to ask hypothetical questions to the author, even though they know that unless we contact the author, we're not going to get the answers. But it helps them to see that texts are a conversation and that we're allowed to bring questions, even if they aren't necessarily going to be answered now. And finally, the metacognition is just them reflecting. So after this class lecture that we have, or this class discussion that we have, it culminates with the reflection paper that I have them write. So I gave them this Choi article written by Han Choi. And then what I have them do is go to our library database, pick out a peer-reviewed scholarly article, which I okay, because I want to make sure they chose a peer-reviewed article. And then they write a reflection on 2 or 3 of the strategies that they used to more effectively read the article. And again, so basically what I'm sharing with you today is just the footprint, I guess, of an exercise that I take them through in allowing them to practice different critical reading strategies. And I think that's all I have right now. Do we have questions?
Let me check the Q&A for you really quickly. We haven't had anything come into our chat, and it doesn't look like we have any open questions at the moment. So if you did have any questions come up during the presentation today, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A at the bottom. We can maybe hang out for a minute just in case any questions come up, and then if not, we can wrap up.
Okay. I wanted to, since we're waiting for questions, I'll just kind of fill in a little bit. Or did someone just ask a question?
Yeah, we did just have one question come through. Valerie would like to know if we could get a brief description of each strategy.
So a brief description of each of these strategies that are on the strategy visual here. Is that what you mean, Valerie?
Valerie, if you could just put your maybe some clarification for her into the Q&A, that'd be great. Oh, she means, she said, I mean written, not just spoken.
Okay. I'm assuming that this critical reading strategy is still, visual is still being shown. Is it still on the screen?
Yes, we can still see, see
Okay.
the screen.
So the little, I guess, the smaller text underneath each larger one is supposed to be a little bit of an explanation. And this is what I give to the students. I tried to make it very brief and concise, just so that they would not have to search very far for example, like this text map. Basically what that strategy is chunking the text. You can create an outline or graphic organizer of the text. You can view the big picture and you can kind of zoom in and zoom out, but that's kind of like gaining for yourself a map of the text. And then like with rhetorical function, it's these 4 things really listed. And again, these are just mine. They're not necessarily right or wrong, or this is just kind of what I have developed to walk my students through.
We had another question that came in that asked if you would mind sharing your strategies map with some of the attendees today.
Sure, I can do that. What would be the best way to do that, Samantha?
If you could just email them to us, and then we can send them out to the attendees.
Okay, so I can do that right after?
Yep, that is fine. And then we do have a couple other questions that have come in, so let me address those really quickly.
Okay.
Corey would like to know, how do you get students engaged with this in an online format, especially fully online?
So that's a tricky one. I've actually never done this online before. I've done it so I've done this, I do this in my composition, my freshman comp classes each semester. I take my own students through it. And then as the Writing Center director, I partner with other professors. One that I partner with regularly is a geology professor, and she sends students into the Writing Center in groups of anywhere from 3 to 5, and we go over this. I haven't done it online before. I think actually I did it online, but we were synchronous, so we were able to still do the same thing I might do in person. We just did it through video. I don't know, to be honest. I think what I would do if I was going to do this online is I would use like a screencast-o-matic, and I would make my own short YouTube video of myself explaining the different strategies and maybe showing what I mean, kind of like what I did with you guys here. And then I would still give the students the assignment that I talked about, which was the reflection. Now choose your own scholarly peer-reviewed article and write a 2-page reflection on explaining 2 to 3 of the strategies that you used to read that article.
Okay, we did have another question come in. How much class time do you devote to reading strategy instructions throughout the semester, at the beginning, etc.?
I think specifically reading strategies, probably just 1, which is probably not enough, but like the rest of you can, I'm sure, understand, in any class, it's hard to get in everything we need to get in. And because the class is freshman writing, it's not a reading class in which I do this. I really only allow one, and I go through these strategies and then I assign the reflection. And then I might refer back to the strategies, as they're using these scholarly articles like this Choi article for sources. I might sort of allude back to our critical reading strategies, but really just one, maybe 1 hour to an hour and a half class period, depending on how my class is that semester and, the length of my class time.
All right, another question. Have you used this strategy with the first chapter of a novel or other assigned text for the course?
I haven't. I've always used it with a scholarly article, like the one that I was showing you, simply because I think, I guess from my viewpoint, this is probably the most difficult. Now, feel free, any of you can disagree with me because maybe I'm not thinking of something, but I think this is the most difficult type of thing they're going to read. So I kind of like to dive right into the most difficult. I'm just thinking, like with a novel, some of these strategies might not apply as closely, such as the evaluate, the annotation, but I don't see why you couldn't use it. I mean, I think you still could. You might just explain to the students, some of these don't apply. And that's another thing that I tell them. I'll say, this is sort of a generic list of strategies because I want to give you something that could apply to anything you read. I don't want to give you something that's only for this one thing that we're reading in class. I want you to be able to take this to your geology class or your sociology class and apply these strategies to anything you might read in college. So with that in mind, I would like to say, yes, I think you could use it for a novel, but I think some of the strategies may not apply as closely.
All right, that's all the questions we have for right now. If anybody had any other questions, please feel free to go ahead and put them into the Q&A.
I guess I do have just a couple other things I wanted to mention. I read an article written, and I have so I read an article, which I don't have it with me right now, but it was a 2016 article based on a university study of 429 students. And what the authors found was that 92% of the students surveyed felt that they could concentrate best when reading in print. So I know amongst, college instructors and many other people, there's that debate as to whether students retain, whether their reading is most effective on digitally or if it's most effective on print. And so I thought that was an interesting study. If anyone's interested in that article, I can also send that to you as well. I had it on my other computer, but I don't have it here. So I still don't know what I think, and I still feel like it's a little bit of a personal choice whether we read in print or digitally, but I thought that study was interesting. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions that have come through. As a friendly reminder, her presentation today will be posted on the Hawks blog, so you can access it there, excuse me. And I have let our marketing team know that we've had some interest in receiving a copy of it. So be sure to check out our blog. And then it still looks like we haven't had any other questions come in. So we can go ahead and wrap up for today. So
it looked like Barbara had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, 1 second. Barbara, if you have a question, would you mind entering it into the Q&A, and then Christina would be happy to address it for you, and Karen as well. Thank you for catching that, Christina. While we wait for those questions to come through, if you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals to our Learning and Growing website, which I will link into the chat now. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put those into our Q&A.
Okay, I see Barbara says, I came in late, but would be interested in knowing if that strategy can be used to train community college math students to learn how to read statistic word problems correctly before they solve them. Possibly some of the strategies. I would think some of the strategies could work. Some of them may not, like the evaluate and the rhetorical function, but I'll certainly make this available, and if you want to try it, you can. I'm of the mindset that, hey, I'll try anything if I don't know what else to do. You know, when it comes to teaching, hey, I'll try it. We'll see what happens. Okay, I think that's it.
Great. If there are no more questions, then we can go ahead and conclude. I'll double check our Q&A really quickly, and it does not look like we've had anything else come in. So we will be emailing a link where you can review the recording of the webinar today once it's available. And if there are no further questions, I hope everyone has a great day. And thank you again, Christina, for hosting today's webinar.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you.